So hello everyone, and thanks so much for joining our third webinar entitled When I'm 64. And as many of you know, I think we now have almost everyone here knows what the Elders Council is, but just very briefly, Chris, Mel and I started the Elders Council with the great support of Ashoka and in particular Clementine, because we know that succession and transition from an organization is of great importance, and in a very momentous time, so we know that there are some practical issues about the finance, making sure that there are pensions, that there's enough money to pay the new leadership. What is, as Jim Fruchterman said recently, what happens to the organization when there isn't the magic of the founder, and so and issues around the board and so on. So we know this is a big issue and many people don't address it early enough. And we also know that it can be a difficult time, and we feel this is a place for people who are going through the succession and transition process to be able to have a place to come to talk to people who have had similar experience, and have some that we all have wisdom to share. All of us here has something to share with the others. So this is why we started the social the Council for Social Entrepreneurs Elders, and we are looking forward to having more webinars and more speakers like ours today. So I'll hand over to Chris to introduce the speakers. He's our chairman for the day and we'll keep order.
Thank you. Keeping order with this group of people would be impossible. So I'm just going to do my best. A very warm welcome to everybody for this session, which is on the subject of When I'm 64. Well, of course, in those days when the Beatles wrote that song, 64 seemed like being very old. And now, of course, social entrepreneurs and many others, of course, now proceed to a much greater age before they consider so-called retirement. And so we are living in a different era to when the Beatles wrote that song. But the subject is still the same. It's about how Gisela and how Dorothy prepared for their departure from their own organizations, and then what happened when they departed. And then in Wietze's case, we are inviting a younger social entrepreneur, even younger than me, to speak to us about his thoughts about this, what preparations he might be making, if any, and how he is viewing this particular situation from his own point of view. What we need to do is to get going. So Gisela, may I invite you to make a start? Very quickly tell us about the organization that you founded, and then stick to the subject.
Speaker is not working. Speaker is not working.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. I think someone is, yeah.
That's okay. Yeah.
Okay. And I wrote down a few words that a few thoughts that I want to share with you, but I want to start saying that I'm really moved to be in this meeting. I've never seen so many beautiful faces. I'm really, my heart is warm looking at you guys. So thank you so much for the invitation. And well, I'm Gisela Solimos. I'm a psychologist, but I am the co-founder of CRANE, the Center for Nutritional Recovery and Education. CRANE fosters the effective nutritional education and recovery of children and adolescents with slight, moderate, or serious primary malnutrition, undernutrition, and obesity, assisting them in their hospitals, outpatient clinics, and at the community level. The center develops and implements new methods for preventing and tackling the widespread undernutrition problem throughout Brazil and Latin America and Africa. CRANE provides training and consultancies on nutritional interventions and expands on the conventional approach by actively searching for cases and undertaking a human-centered global intervention and educational approach that allows for long-lasting outcomes. My engagement with CRANE was not planned. but happened as the result of a series of events. As a psychologist, I was trying to start my clinic, my own clinic, but I wasn't making enough results for my clinic. So I got this part-time job to do a research in the slums of São Paulo. This series of I've done this job for 2 years, and meanwhile, the center was built by the co-founder. Actually, it was built by me, but it was her project. And at the end, we needed a manager, and I accepted to be the co-founder and CEO because this was something that had to be done, and there was no one else available to do it in that precise moment. At that time, I did not have any managerial training. I was not a nutritionist or a nurse, the ideal professional profiles for this role. I also had no experience with small children, and my first trials to act as a psychologist with the families, with the malnourished families we assisted, were a failure. But I did have some skills. To know some of these skills were to know what was needed and what I did not know, and to know how to look for help and to ask for help. So we started with one unit with 4 employees, assisting 6 children in day hospital and about 50 children in our outpatient clinic. Today, after 25 years of existence, we have 3 units and 1 social franchise. We have conducted projects around Brazil, Latin America, and Africa. And we have had an indirect impact on the lives of over 7.5 million people. In 2011, 2012, I was awarded the Schwab's social entrepreneur as a Schwab Social Entrepreneur of the Year, and then also I became an Ashoka Fellow. In 2014, 2015, I started to feel that the organization was not growing and developing as much as it could, of course, according to my point of view. And after some failed trials to address this issue, to put it on the track I wanted to put it, I concluded that the best solution was to do a governance transition, giving space to other people to take over and grow, also for people to grow, not just the organization. So I left the general manager position in August 2017. So it took me like 2 years to do this shift. We created a managerial board integrated by me, by the other co-founder, the president of the organization, as we all were as volunteers, as we are now until now. And we also have in this board the 2 managers that took over part of my responsibilities. In April 2018, I left to the United States as a visiting professor in the University of Notre Dame to start a new project. I stayed there until July 2019, analyzing CRAN's data and working on a knowledge hub for nutritional interventions, which was my new project. I wanted to be this new project. This move was really hard, meaning I had to stop concerning about CRAN's issues and I had to start the new activities that were completely different. I went back to the year when I wrote my PhD, and I would have a structured routine, waking up every day at the same time and spending my time reading, reflecting, and writing. I love doing that, but to do that when I was expecting to be actively working on a new project was quite a challenge. Also, I left a well-established and important position in Brazil to be a no one in a small city of the US Midwest with a heavy winter, experiences such as getting rid of the snow in my car in the morning or driving on icy roads were completely new for me. And with almost none acquaintances and no idea what I would do next. This adventure lasted for 1.5 years, so I was back in Brazil in July 2019 with no job and no new project. In this situation, I did a consultancy to UNICEF, being hired by Crane, by my own organization. They hired me as a consultant. And then I decided to go and to talk to a couple of friends to understand the situation in the country and to ask them, in their opinion, how could I contribute? My goal was to understand how my experience and skills could be useful to someone somewhere. Making another long story short, one of these friends was working at SEBRAE, the Brazilian Micro and Small Business Support Service. SEBRAE is a non-for-profit entity with the mission of promoting the sustainable and competitive development of small businesses. SEBRAE São Paulo has 33 regional offices all over the state and serves around 3 million people and micro and small enterprises with 1,000 people as a permanent staff, beyond the other people that are hired for temporary jobs.
Gisela, you have about 3 minutes left.
I'm there. These friends organized the meeting where I was meant to present a project to be supported by them. At the end, they offered me a job. They wanted my help to increase SEBRAE's social impact, taking their services to people at the bottom of the pyramid, a public that they did not work with. For me, it was a completely new challenge, totally out of my comfort zone or my experience. Well, I knew how to work with very poor people, but I had never worked in a massively structured organization like this one. And I had never had a boss in my life. This was a game change full of questions and doubts. Am I doing the right thing? Am I wasting my and their time and resources? Will I be really able to give any contribution to this organization, etc.? Besides that, one night I woke up 3 a.m. realizing that I was 2 years away from my retirement and I was acting and living as I was 20 years old, meaning I was starting all over again instead of collecting the fruits and benefits of a well-lived life and career. I accepted the challenge, but had to be reassured a couple of times by this friend, the company's CEO, and other friends. This experience helped me to realize how attached I was to my organization and to the role that I had there. Also, to start all over again is in a certain way very humiliating because I did not know many things or anything. It is not an easy position and demands a sort of poverty and humbleness that I not necessarily had, but also helped me to understand once again that my social entrepreneur trajectory was born from my yes to someone asking for my help and not from a personal plan. So here we go again. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And a special thank you for being on time. In fact, for saving us the time. That's brilliant.
More 30 seconds I have.
Yeah, no, you did very well. You had exactly that. So there are a number of issues which have come out of your talk, Gisela, and I think everybody is really very, very interested and touched, if I may say so, by the way in which you have been so authentically vulnerable in this context. And that's so helpful from our point of view as friends and colleagues who are beginning to think about these trajectories on our own. So many, many thanks indeed. We'll come back to you, of course. If you have questions, I'm talking to the audience now. And if you have questions, do let us know what the questions are on the chat, and we'll come back to you. But meanwhile, let me ask Dorothy to come in and to start speaking to us. Dorothy, over to you.
There's somebody who should probably go on mute. Who's
yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they have gone on mute now. That's fine.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I was thinking about this group coming into it, and I thought, well, who are we? Who's this group? Not knowing who would be on it. And I thought, well, they all identify as social entrepreneurs. So who are we? And then I was thinking about the 3 promises that FDR made in the United States, right? He talks about, or the 4 freedoms, right? He's got the 4 freedoms: freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And I think that we should add to that the freedom to create. and to freedom to create good things that solve problems that benefit humanity, because I think that's who we are and what human beings have as a fifth desire in our hearts, that we want to be creating those things. And there's something about us that drove us to do that, or we had a freedom to do that. And for me, some of that freedom came from my class privilege as an upper middle class American. Some of it came from my racial privilege as a white person, had to overcome some of the sexism that existed because women weren't supposed to necessarily be in charge. But you know, the privilege overcame the oppression, and I was able to create something called Youth Build. It grew out of the civil rights movement in the 60s when I joined the civil rights movement in Harlem. And basically the essence of what Youth Build is that we invite low-income young people who have left high school without a diploma, who faced all sorts of difficulties, into a supportive community in which they pick up their education, they build affordable housing for homeless and low-income people in their communities so that they're seen in the community as a resource that's producing something of value to their communities. And we support them in becoming leaders and change agents for the long haul. Now, if there's something I'd like to do in the long haul that I haven't yet done, it's to create a funding stream that supports low-income young adults who have emerged from poverty, who have the social entrepreneur drive, but who don't have the resources or the freedom yet to implement their vision. So we can come back to some of that. So I created Youth Build in East Harlem. Now, to talk about transition, that was 1978. I left in 1988, and I still serve as chairman of the board of the original Youth Build program in East Harlem 32 years later. So that's one way to handle a transition. You just move up and stay in charge. But then when I left as the executive director of Youth Action Program and started Youth Build USA, that was in, I don't know, 1988. Fast forward, we created 250 Youth Build programs in the United States, got a federal line item, brought $1.3 billion into low-income communities across the country, and 180,000 young people built 33,000 units of affordable housing, and we institutionalized it in federal law and in the Department of Labor. So that felt good. At the same time, one of my staff got really interested in doing international, so he started Youth Build International as part of our organization, and now Youth Build is in 21 other countries. And so at a certain point, I thought to myself, I mean, when I started it, I said, I'm going to have to stick with this for 20 years at least, because it's going to take time to do this. Around 2013, my board said to me, Dorothy, you're 71 years old. Are you thinking about succession? And I said, no. I'm full steam ahead until I drop dead. Then I'll turn it over to you. Meanwhile, I built a strong bench team. There's a lot of good leadership here. So no, I'm not worried about it. Come and meet all the vice presidents and you'll be satisfied. So they did that. But then around 2015, I said to the board, you know, I think I'm ready to go. I think I've institutionalized this. It can live without me. And so let's start planning a transition. So they said, okay, but don't tell anyone yet because you'll be a dead duck, or a lame duck, I guess they called it. So let's keep it a secret for a while we talk about it. And they were really right about that, because the moment I announced that I was leaving in a year, everything began to change. So I did keep it a secret for about 6 months, but even then, you know, there's about a year when the board is going through this process. Now, when I prepared for this conversation, I was thinking, I would say, there is no conventional wisdom that can guide you through a transition. It's going to be completely different in every circumstance, depending on where you're at, where your organization is at, and that there are a lot of factors to consider. Of course, you want to consider some basic questions like how to secure the future of the organization, how to get the best successor in place, how to leverage the strengths of the founder to give the new CEO as much support and resources as possible. And over time, how to set things up to ensure that the new CEO actually succeeds and is held accountable for succeeding in case they don't, right? But then I found a wonderful article this morning. I was searching, thinking maybe I'm wrong, maybe there is some conventional wisdom. And I found a great article, which Chris can put on the chat box, in the Stanford Social Innovation Review by someone I know and trust named Phyllis Siegel. It's called The 6 Strategies for Nonprofit Leadership Transition. And I read it, I thought it was very good. So for me, what I did, different from what somebody else might do, depending on their circumstances, was I chose not to control the selection of my successor. I didn't propose anyone. There was nobody internally who seemed to be perfectly prepared. So I decided to trust the board. And so they put together their committee and went through it. And I decided not to maintain ongoing responsibility for the organization, not to be on the board. I wanted, at age 76, whatever I was, 74, I wanted to free myself from the responsibility of this huge international organization with a $34 million a year budget. Internally, I wanted to be free. And I didn't want to worry about it. And I didn't, so but then what I also did, I mean, I had to, I'm still one of those people. I'm a social entrepreneur who can't stop, and I was still physically healthy and energetic. And I had created something inside Youth Build called Opportunity Youth United, where I had brought together 15 other organizations and their graduates and created the beginning of a movement of low-income young adults who wanted to end poverty and injustice in the United States. So I began building that out in 2012. And by the time I left Youth Build USA in 2016, that was fairly robust. So I served as the director of that for a couple of years. And then now I have transitioned out of that because, you know, you got to deal with something else in this time. I'm old, I'm white, I'm upper middle class. If we're trying to end poverty, what's happening is that low-income young adults, largely young adults of color, are moving into leadership. So I handed that torch to a 30-year-old young leader. And so he took charge. So now then the question is, how do you make sure that you still get to use yourself in the ways that give you the most satisfaction after you stop being in charge of a huge organization? And for me, a lot of that has turned into being a mentor for younger leaders. And more, there are individuals who are turning to me, and we have structured relationships and talk to each other on a regular basis. And I've also been teaching them healing methodologies and ways of, because they all say to me, how did you last for 50 years? What is it that, why do you still have the energy, and why didn't you, lose it? And so I teach them all the methods that I used to stay alive and well. And of course, one good thing is having a wonderful husband, right, who's willing to support you. But then there's other things where, you dump your painful emotions, and you have to find methods for doing that. And I have some methods for doing that. And then of course, there's longer term, like we have some capacities to be used. Like, are there new laws that we could create once we've left our organization? Are there new funding streams, new organizations, new networks? Are we supposed to write articles and write books? How do we communicate our learnings and our expertise? I mean, I never published a book. All those years, everyone kept saying, write a book, write a book, write a book. I still haven't. I still should, but that's something for us to think about. And it's something my board wanted me to do, but I didn't. Let's see, how many seconds do I have left, Chris?
30 seconds left.
Okay, 30 seconds left. So
I put the link out for you.
Our legacies, the organization we created, our communication of important ideas, our mentees and the ripple effect that they create, the movements that have emerged from our work, and the people influenced by the experience and ideas and the ripple effect that they have. And that's my time. Good. Thank you very much.
Dorothy, that's wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's so clever that you were counting yourself in as well. So that's marvelous. That's really good. There was a lot of wisdom in there, Dorothy, and I'm glad. And we're recording this session, so we'll be able to get some of that down when we want to. And I've also put out your link that you wanted me to put out. And so we can think about ways in which we can share this information more widely as we go through the seminar or the webinar and out the other side. But thank you for the time being, Dorothy. And if people have questions, do please put them in the chat. And now it's my pleasure to invite you, Wietse, from Sea Rangers, to give us your talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, and also for the invitation. I echo Gazella's words. You know, that it's great to be in the call. And while everyone always talks about young people making a difference, this is the second call I'm in with the Elders Council, and this is definitely what the experience is. So I don't know why there are more young folk here, but yeah, this is the place to be for sure. So I started working at my first environmental NGO when I was 9 years old as a youth ranger. So after that, I spent many years working in environmental NGOs. And I would say I, at some point, transitioned into more social entrepreneurship because I felt there was little room for maybe personal development or future perspective. So even holding a steady job in the NGO sector, I never studied as a scientist or as an academic or in policy. It was just not something for me. So more of an entrepreneurial focus. And I actually, over the last few years, established 6 businesses. 5 of those are governed within one group. And that main group is called the Sea Ranger Service. Really quickly, what we do is essentially that we train young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, particularly coastal communities where the youth unemployment is high. And we train them and we build special ships and bring them out to sea to restore biodiversity in the ocean. So it's a way to improve management and protection of the ocean while at the same time tackling unemployment. Very similar to actually FDR's programs around the New Deal, very much been a big inspiration for that. So I now run a team of about 30 people that scales to about 50 when we do specific projects. Our organization is sort of currently working in 2 countries and we're scaling to 3 other countries from next year. So yeah, I love the freedom of working in the role. I'm the founder, I'm sort of the CEO of the organization, not sort of, I'm very much the CEO. And I just love that I have that freedom. I can initiate projects, you know, we can make things happen. And I also love this notion, especially in the environmental space, that I can leverage philanthropic funds and partnerships with government, with investment and with capital to build our ships. And a lot of things are possible. So while I love that, actually, perhaps contrary to what Dorothy was mentioning, in my case, from the moment I started this organization, I always planned to leave my CEO role within 8 years. So actually, from the moment we started, everything we've done, every new role we created, we made sure there are very clear job descriptions, that there is very clear, that all the standards and procedures are written out, that not just me, but also others in the organization, if someone were to leave, someone else can come in and take that role. So in a way, it's about taking the magic out of people in certain positions and allowing for it to all be a lot more flexible, about people coming in and simply being able to take over. And I would say, I won't name any names, but I worked for a couple of big, better known environmental organizations where founder syndrome was a real problem. You could just tell that someone was sticking around and was preventing the organization from growing, from sort of moving into a more, you know, into just you know, ensuring it could go with the times. So with our board members, we're currently in the process of drawing up succession plans for 2024 when I will transition out. And the board has agreed that I will get a one-off payment, which is essentially for me to start the next organization. So as our success sort of grows, they actually acknowledge that, you know, that I'm sort of a starter, if you will, and I, you know, and I will get onto that next step. I don't hold any equity in our companies. All of it is owned by our charity, so there's not sort of money to be taken or value that I hold. And currently, we also don't have any pension plans. This is something also Chris, I think, asked me specifically about, like, how does this work with pensions and allowing for some financial security for yourself as well. So I think there are real benefits, and I think it's really important to offer good pension plans to your staff. So we are, I think, next year potentially, but definitely the year after, we are big enough to start offering that. And I think good working conditions are essential to, you know, to build a good organization. But for me, and I'd love to hear in a moment about maybe some of the other younger folk on the call, but will there be a feasible pension option in 2050? I think that's for me a real thing in terms of how do I rely on that option to be there, or do I find other ways where I have a bit more control for myself on how I can at least have the finances to, be able to live well comfortably, or at least be able to sustain myself once I stop working. But 2024 is the first deadline, to use also Dorothy's term of, there's no problem to find ways to use myself, as she put it. I have 3 other new big ideas. And actually, I feel really committed to ensure that I give 5 to 7 years to each of these new ideas and organizations to develop, and then follow the same process of handing over and transitioning. And also taking the emotional commitment I have to these organizations and this cause, to take that out, to really ensure that from the get-go, I'm someone who helps to implement and deliver the program. And while I, of course, with a lot of passion and youthful enthusiasm, will continue to, spread the word and talk about how we work to protect oceans, and how, young people, in our case, are at the forefront of that. That I sort of put myself in another position where I very much need other people sort of lead the way. So I guess over the next few years, there'll be other organizations I work for. I save, so for my wages, I actually save quite a bit. And I guess I will build up a little bit of pension. Interestingly, I'm also part, besides Ashoka, of another sort of, it's more of a startup kind of network in the US. East, sort of West Coast, sort of young startup founders. And really interesting is there that while there's a lot of talk of doing good, for them, it's really normal that there is an exit. They set up businesses after 7, 8, 9 years, there is an exit. They hold a large part of the equity, and and they simply make the cash, and there's never a conversation around sorting out their own pension or such. And that's not a route I want to go, because I don't think, I don't really care so much for the money. But I do think it's interesting that I think there is a younger generation of people who also feel they can make positive impact for the world. But for them, it's quite normal that they own the business, and they, this is a way for those 2-3 minutes, for them to sort of take care of themselves financially in that way. So I will continue to do what I love. I'll make sure I save some money for later on, and build up some pension, and that'll have to do. I'm sure I'll be fine.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And we all hope and sincerely pray that you will be fine. Absolutely.
Indeed.
That's the least we can do in saying thank you for your contribution. But I think the main thing that you're telling us is that you have, in a sense, you divided your active life in your mind up into different slices or chunks, and you see yourself starting a number of these organizations around these big ideas that you've had, and so on. I'm still keen that you look into a pension one way or the other, but that's just my personal bias. Now, let's invite the audience to give me some questions. Either wave your hands at me or plunk them on the. Susanna, you have a question. Unmute yourself and talk to us. There we are.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I tried the other meetings and somehow I didn't make it. So I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate this coming together. And as I wrote, I think we have a great deal of wisdom. I am an environmentalist. I put together an NGO in Brazil called IP, Institute for Ecological Research. And we began very small. Now we are around 100 throughout Brazil, which is continental. So we are in the Amazon, Atlantic forest, and so forth. My question, one thing that I learned over time is to empower our team, because then we can somehow, they don't depend on us. The institution does not depend on us. And if I leave, I know that there will be somehow a continuation. My husband and I were the founders. My husband is a leader, a very strong leader in what he does. And the preparation for him to leave was a whole year. And we put together 4 teams in order for him to leave.
That's brilliant. And what was the question, Susanna?
I'm sorry. I'm just. I'm sorry. I'll go to it. It's how are we going to share all this, even for the other Ashoka Fellows or the Schwab Foundation or whatever.
Yeah.
We have a great deal of wisdom and a responsibility with it to share.
Thank you for that question. And thank you for sharing some of your wisdom, by the way. Really appreciate it. Absolutely. And we will definitely put that question down and come back to it afterwards. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Andrea, did you gather one or two?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, one of a comment I'd like to make on something Dorothy said about there being no conventional wisdom. I think that's why we feel that this group is very important, because we need to build some wisdom that people can lean on. I'm encouraged by what Lisa says about he thinks maybe young people think about the financial side more quickly than some of us did. But I think we need to start to build some conventional wisdom around social enterprise and succession. The question I wanted to ask is, Gisela and Dorothy, if you had to do succession differently today, knowing what you know now, would you do it? Would there be another way you would do it? Gisela, what have you got an answer to that? Would you do it differently?
That's a great question. I'm afraid I might not know how to do it, even if I would like to do differently. I think I made it in a very smooth way, but there's one issue that I was not able to address, and I did in a smooth way. I think the organization has its own life and it's going its own trajectory, which is not the trajectory I would do with the organization, to be very sincere. But it's good. I mean, it's doing its work, its job. It's not a problem at all. And the one thing that I wasn't able to solve is I think the big view I have. There's no one in the organization that has, I don't know how to say this in a better words, but I see you can understand, right? The big view, you when you see further and you know where you're going.
Like a landscape.
I don't, sorry?
Like a landscape.
Yeah.
And you're the visionary.
Yeah, I can't see anyone in my organization. And I think this is a failure. It's my failure in the sense that maybe I didn't give enough time. So what I would do differently, I would try to find young people and try to bring them to me and to share this view and maybe to prepare someone with this view to take over. And I did not do that for many reasons. So I would do differently.
Thank you, Gisela. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Dorothy?
absolutely. Dorothy, what about you?
Well, I can't answer that question yet. So I'm almost 4 years out. A lot of things went very well, and I've had a great 4 years. But as you watch your successor and what they emphasize or change or abandon or all of that, I mean, you've got to deal with your emotions of like, oh my God, you know, are they right? Are they wrong? Should I do something about that? Is it's so gone, it's out of my hands, or I want to tell them to do something different? I mean, you go through all of those changes. So I can't answer that question yet. I don't think I could have done it very differently from what I did, all things considered at that moment. And are there things right now I wish had been handled differently in the last 2 years? Yeah, but I put myself in a position where I had no influence or control over that. So that was my choice.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. I see Kat is there and then John is there. So come in, Kat, and then come in, John, after Kat.
I really appreciate it. I appreciate the whole idea of us being able to get together and see each other like this.
And Kat, we appreciate you.
And I particularly appreciated the conversation this morning around whether or not there is a template And I think that there, as probably Dorothy may have alluded to, there are some templates that are not universally applicable. And one is like, how much access do you have to resources? I think the work that the Annie Casey Foundation is doing about the nonprofit sector is so helpful, because we don't have pensions, we don't have benefits, we don't have all of those things that make lifetime employees. And so we almost have to figure out how to do both of those things at the same time, although we're often drawn to the service part of it. And then you have to build the sustainability piece, build the road while walking. But I think we need to be a lot more clearer with that, with younger people entering the field, and ought to really shine a light on that and help people get those kind of skills, again, depending on where you are on the privilege scale.
Mhm. Thank you, Kat, very much for that. So we're going to come to John, and then we'll come to Caitlin, who has a question of Vitze. Come in, John. Maybe, John, you should unmute before you speak. That's the oldest trick in the book.
Don't you like it when you're smart?
Yeah, too smart by half.
Ah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly. We hear
Okay.
your nice gravelly voice.
I think it's really important that timing be a major consideration in this kind of thing. I stepped down earlier than I wanted to because I knew who I wanted my successor to be. And if I had waited, it would have been up to my board. And I was pretty sure my board would have screwed it up, but royally. In other words, I didn't want to leave the decision to the board. And you need to do it a bit earlier when you're still at your full powers and not later on. So that was a very important thing.
Mhm.
I think it also would have been important from my perspective to get some assurances, more assurances of the way the board, the direction of the organization. Because like most people, there were things that got dropped that I would have preferred didn't get dropped, and the like. And when you're no longer in charge, you can't do very much about that. But I think it's a disaster in the making to bring in an outsider, because you have absolutely no idea what they're going to do. And the fact that they interview well has nothing to do with how they run an organization. And by having an insider, at least you know that they're going to stay consistent with the purpose and the vision of the organization. I chose somebody who had worked for the organization for 10 years and then had gone off. So he had the best of both worlds. But I think that kind of foresight is very important. And I've seen organization after organization that have brought in outsiders and have really just had horrible problems with them. You know, the fact that somebody has read your website well enough to talk to you about what they think you want to hear or what your board wants to hear has nothing to do with the reality of running an organization. So those are just some thoughts.
Those are indeed some thoughts. Thank you very much, John, for those. And just to remind friends and colleagues that there are some great thoughts on the chat. Just have a spin through there as we're talking. Caitlin, you had a question for Vitze, I think.
Hi, I was really interested to hear about your vision as you went into a project. So the fact that you had a timeline, and the fact that you almost indicated you wanted to have a slight emotional protection there to make sure that it was easier for you to leave. What sort of strategies do you put in place to create that sort of barrier?
Yeah, that's a big one. I think the emotional connection to our work is the big force that I think for many of us makes everything possible. But at the same time, I think it's important to also acknowledge that it also can be an obstacle from just working really pragmatically on what is the best way. And I think, I think it's quite arrogant to think that I am the best at doing this job, or that I somehow need to be involved in every aspect of it. In our case, that's also a little bit different because we work on, for example, shipbuilding and training and negotiating with governments, and those are fairly sort of specified roles that other people have a lot more professional experience in. I put others in charge early on in terms of the day-to-day running, and from the get-go, there was sort of a combination of being really clear on where my vision lied and what I thought would work, but also allowing a lot of other people involved in the decisions. So I feel that I'm sort of correcting things now and then to make sure we still keep focus. But because already a lot of people are running the organization, I could now leave for 3 months and I wouldn't be too worried because we are so clear on what our mission is and how we achieve it, and especially what are all the things we do not do. And then it's also a process of letting go. It's about creating a distance, I would say, with the work. Maybe I'm autistic enough to, for me as a person, to be able to do that. But I think, yeah, it's also a question of doing a lot of other things besides your work project, having other interests, being involved in other things, and not making sure it's the only thing you do. So it allows me to transition maybe a bit more easily from that standpoint, from the emotional one, into starting the next project.
Great. Thank you so much, Fitze. And by the way, everybody, Caitlin is the lady who's responsible for the Elders Council new website and design, brand, and all of that. It is yet to come up, but she's doing a wonderful job for us, so we really appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing working with her. Christy has put a very interesting thing on. She said that maybe we need to talk about wills in the future, as in making a will, which I think is interesting. And the whole question of the way in which you finance future ideas. Both Fitze and Christy have talked about in different ways. And I think that's good. Andrea, was there a further question that had come to your mind?
Shona has a question, Chris. She has raised her hand. Okay,
that's great. Shona, thank you very much, Gisela. Shona, come in.
Gisela, hello. I had a question. I'm also sort of on the edge of handing over. I've got a really good team. I could also be away for quite a number of months. Nobody would miss me. But what I'm struggling with is I made a decision about 3 years ago to build a team so that I could hand it over to them, but it is a team, it's not one person. And I wondered if anybody else had been through a process where they actually had handed over to shared leadership, because I don't believe single leadership is healthy. I don't want anybody else to work in the way I have and hold the responsibility I have. And I just feel I wish I'd had a partner in the organization for many years that I could have shared the leadership with. So I'm in the process of handing over to a team. It might be 2, it might be 3, but it's definitely not 1. So I just wondered if anybody had experiences with that, and how you what sort of governance do you put in place to help them manage that relationship? Because partnerships are never easy. Sometimes the easy way is just one, and then it's dictatorship or however you want to run it. But I've always led from behind, and as an organization gets larger and more complex, and I've also got a number of 4 different entities within the governance structure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Shona. So Kat has an answer to that, and we also have one from Esma as well. So come in, Kat, and then we'll ask Esma to make a couple of comments, and then we're going to go to Mel for a roundup.
I'd like to share what I did. A few years ago, Ashoka had a fellowship, but I think it was called the Young Champions of Maternal Health. And they basically had kind of like pre-Ashoka fellows. You have to be under 30 years old, do a 9-month fellowship with an Ashoka fellow in the North. And I ended up with a couple, one from Ethiopia, one from Nigeria. But then when they had the closing in Ghana, all of the fellows came together. And I got a chance to see these students, these young professionals from all these different countries that were under 30 years old. And that's actually where the name Mama Cat kind of started, is I ended up being their kind of like mentor and person that was here, primarily because Ashoka does not have a lot of fellows of color. And so that makes it kind of, when you're looking for a mentor. But the long and short of it is that we started an organization back then based on that, called the Young Professionals or the Next Generation or whatever. And we have backed up, and our organization and other organizations have been using them in a way of next generation learning how you actually run an organization, because that kind of was the missing piece. So I'm saying, like, pulling a group of people together and really cultivating that relationship and showing them in that way how it's really run over a period of years. So you have a pool to choose from.
Thank you, Kat. That very much indeed. Esma, did you want to make a further comment from the one that you had made on the chat? Do you want to come in?
No, hi, everybody. No, I think it's fine. I just wanted to share my experience.
Yeah.
And I wish I can write it down and send it to your website later on.
Do please consider doing that. I think that would be great. You've put a couple of thoughts here. One is, I learned we should not recruit only young people, but also a couple of wise and experienced colleagues, you said. So,
yes, because it was very difficult to find a successor, because we had a lot of colleagues who were very young and who need more experience. And I think that's why I thought this is the major lesson for me. Yeah. So we had to wait until they become wise to leave the institution so they can take over.
Right. And then you mentioned also in the chat that you are the chair of the NGO, and you still have the energy to create new institutions for training and coaching young entrepreneurs in Tunisia. I'm sure you do. Yeah.
Yes, I do. In fact, we created something very original, because the NGO now is the major shareholder of the microfinance institution.
Yeah.
And we still get money, so we can create new institutions to keep training and coaching young entrepreneurs and work with children. So I think we created a sustainable system. We don't need to count on donors anymore.
Oh, that's great. So look, Esma, even though you didn't want to say anything, you have said something. So that's great.
Sorry, I mean, I didn't want to speak because of my English, so it's fine.
Your English is perfect. Thank you so much. And I wanted just to draw everyone's attentions to some of the remarks that have been coming through from Kurt, for example, earlier on. Thank you, Kurt, very much for those remarks, which are very much appreciated. And Mel, maybe come to you, please, to finish off the session by doing a little summary for us.
Thank you very much, Chris, and hi to everybody. Just in terms of summation here, I think it's been a very, very rich session. First of all, we heard from Gisela and Dorothy about their experience. I think similar in some ways to Chris and Andrew's and mine, given the certain age that we are, never really thought about exit strategies. It's a new planning, and have done things in quite a different way. So hearing those stories was absolutely great, and provided us with a kind of potential, looking at different ways to go forward. I think it was interesting to hear John, for example, later on in the conversation, talking about how it was very, very important that he was involved in the appointment of his successor, but Dorothy was saying, no, their board did it. And I think that these things are interesting for us to compare and contrast. Sometimes they're down to individuals, but sometimes maybe, you know, were these decisions correct in terms of the outcome, so we can look back and judge that. I think it was really interesting as well, the motivation behind it. So we all have the same motivation. We want to change the world. And just because we're leaving an organization doesn't mean we stop, we continue on and we keep doing what we're doing. And that was kind of Gisela and Dorothy both articulated that, I think, very well. And then we had this great kind of contrast then with Vita in terms of a younger person and the way he's looking at things. And in many ways, this is completely different from the way the other 5 of us would have done things. And I've heard other more younger people talk about this kind of planned exit. And that whole connection that you mentioned just there 5 minutes ago between the emotion, that total 100% emotion all of us put into our organization, and how do you manage that? And I think that's the kind of core of all of this. How do we move, and what emotions are we taking with us and leaving behind, and what organizations, and can we just walk out and leave it in a sustainable way? That's the nub of all this. So hearing your input there, I think is really added a whole dimension to this conversation that we're having and the way forward. I'll leave it there. There's lots more I could say on this. Suffice just to say that this has been a really, really interesting conversation. I think I suspect we could go on for another 2 or 3 hours with this. And the wisdom, not only from the speakers, which we're incredibly grateful for, but the other contributors as well, is really important. And how we capture that now going forward is something for the 3 of us at the Elders Council to look at, because this is very, very valuable, I think, not only for ourselves in terms of sharing with each other, but also in terms of passing on to others who may be in the middle of their career. I certainly, from my own perspective, never looked on what I was doing as a career. It was just, it's part of a movement, it's part of changing the world. And I think that's where all of us are coming from. And in a sense, that's what we need to capture. But I took a lot of notes here. I could go on for another half an hour, kind of reeling back to you some of the issues that have come up. Really fantastic insights. And from my side, I'd like to say thank you. And we'll get back to everyone. We're doing another webinar, as you know, in a few weeks. And we'll keep building on what you've inputted today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mel. Yes, we have early December. We have the next webinar, but we'll be in touch with you on that one. And that, can you remember, Andrea or Mel, what the subject of that is? Just before we go.
It's called The Magnificent Dance, and it's about what a thrill it is to be moving on, not to think of it as a terrible thing, but what a great future we will have after we move on from the leadership of our organizations. So
magnificent dance, you see. So,
it'll be uplifting.
Yes, that's we wanted the Christmas edition to be an uplifting one, of course.
As so, this one has been.
This one has also been really uplifting. I just wanted to say, Gisela, thank you so much. Dorothy, thank you so much. And Beatles, so much. Thank you very much indeed to all 3 of you. Clementine, thanks for your facilitation. Really appreciate that. And thank you all for attending. It's been a lovely session. As Kurt said, it's been packed with information. Susanna had to go early, but she also said the same thing. It's been lovely to see you all, and look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best for now.
Love to everyone.